name is Daria, and I welcome you to the next discussion panel organized by the United Nations Association of Poland. My guest today is Marvin Rees, Mayor of Bristol, the largest city in the southwest of England. Bristol has been ranked as the UK's greenest city and one of the best cities for students. A warm welcome, and I'm glad that you are with us today.
Thank you.
Allow me to jump straight to my first question. You were elected as a mayor in 2016. And just to recall, 2016 was quite challenging. It was full of hesitation, mainly because of Brexit and everything that comes together with it. So there was definitely a lot of pressure coming from the society and a lot of expectation. So that was not the easiest time for you to start your journey as a political leader of Bristol. You also stated that Bristol at that time was missing the long-term development strategy, and that became your priority. So together with your team, you came up with a development strategy for Bristol that consists of 6 categories, including housing, communities, education and skills, transport and connectivity, and health, well-being, and last but not least, economy and environment. But that was roughly 4 years ago. And 4 years ago, not a single person could assume that in 2020, we're gonna have pandemic. Not a single person could say that in 2020, there's gonna be a national lockdown in every single country in Europe. My first question is, how have your priorities changed or evolved as a result of COVID-19?
Well, I would say in a strange way, they haven't really changed because what COVID has done is it's exposed some of those underlying weaknesses in the way we've put our societies together. So we know it's had a disproportionate impact on people with pre-existing health conditions. We know people born in or living in poor conditions are those more likely to have pre-existing health conditions. It's fallen disproportionately on the shoulders of migrant communities and Black and minority ethnic people as well, people in overcrowded housing. So someone in the UK described it as a syndemic. You should not only understand it as a pandemic, but what he calls a syndemic. And what they mean by that is the true impact of COVID is understood as the product of the interaction between the communicable disease, which is the virus, and non-communicable health conditions, such as obesity and asthma and so forth. So if you deal with those wider social issues, actually you could begin to build resilience into your society. So many of the things that we were focused on, inequalities, health inequalities, educational inequalities, the housing crisis, have just been stressed to us as being more important because those have been our areas of weakness. And then on the issue, the other priority issues on the environment, we always had very ambitious goals around the sustainability of our development and ecological diversity. And what this pandemic has really ushered in upon us is the fragility of so many of our systems and what happens if we face a shock. So what we don't want is a climate shock. So again, it's just kind of up the ante on just how important it is to deal with those underlying inequalities and to deal with the readiness of our society and to reduce the contribution we make to future shocks. The phrase we started to use a lot was, we need to rebuild, but we need to rebuild a society, an economy that is both more resilient to future shocks, but minimizes the contribution it makes to the likelihood of future shocks. And those future shocks could be other pandemics, but they could be social shocks, social breakdown. They could be economic shocks, or they could be climate shocks as well. So we need to be more resilient, but minimize the contribution to them. That falls in line with the priorities we came in with, which was about building a more just, inclusive, sustainable society.
Yeah, definitely, I agree with the part about resilience of the society to make sure that we're more prepared for the future shocks. So next, my second question will be about sustainable development goals that were introduced in 2015 by the United Nations. So there are 17 main goals as a part of Agenda 2030. Which objectives are the most demanding for Bristol and why?
Well, I just reflected on that the other day. It's a really challenging question because you could say meeting carbon. We in Bristol we want to meet carbon neutrality by 2030. That is phenomenally challenging, practically challenging. It's expensive. We have to retrofit homes, but we've set out to try and find a way of doing it. But at the same time, when you take an issue like poverty, right, it may not seem to be the burning platform that climate offers us, but it's never. We haven't solved it. We have centuries of not solving challenges of poverty, and we certainly have decades of in what we might call a more enlightened modern era of saying that we want to solve poverty and no one should be poor in a globalized world and all that, but still not solving it. So you have these wicked challenges, women's rights as well, but decent work. These things, again, even in a city like Bristol, aren't always experienced by people, and it's hard to grab a hold of them. But certainly, the burning platform for us is climate, life on land, life on sea, right, and ecological diversity, because therein is the tipping point that once you go beyond a certain point, there's no coming back. The other things I'm committed to tackling poverty, but you get a sense that more people will be born and there'll be a chance to have a go at it, which is one of the reasons maybe why the world has been a little bit lax on tackling it over the decades. So yeah, they're broad. What I do like about the SDGs is that it offers you a more rounded, multi-dimensional understanding of what sustainable development is. It's not single issue, and I get a lot of single issue activism. You have to tackle these on multi-dimensions, and turning up to someone's home when they can't feed their children today and saying, I know this is a problem that you can't feed your children, but I've got a bigger challenge I want you to take on, is that the ice caps are melting. That's not respectful. And what it forces us to do is say that, we can bring these great existential human threats into the common space, but we need to respect the existential threats that individuals and individual families are facing today, right here, right now. If we fail to do that, they'll be less inclined to give you the democratic mandate to engage in the speed and scale of change we need to engage in to solve the climate, to tackle the climate emergency that's upon us as well. That's one of the reasons I really am committed to the SDGs.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you said it. We can't really concentrate on one thing, one challenge, and forget about the rest. And it's somehow connected with the slogan that comes with the SDGs that says "leave no one behind." So we can't prioritize one challenge and then forget about the rest. What is your interpretation of this slogan?
Well, I put it in terms of what we've experienced is a world in which a bunch of wealth has been generated over recent decades and it's basically raced off over the hill and left thousands and thousands of people behind, well, millions of people behind, right? So if you take this down to my city, Bristol, so well-known city, you gave some of the accolades at the front end to world-class universities, a net contributor to the national economy, a third of the world's natural history broadcasting, city of innovation, Concord, Silicon Gorge, 5G testbed, many, many amazing things about Bristol. And all those things are true. But it is also true that 1 in 4 children in Bristol are growing up in income deprived households, which is absolutely phenomenal. About 1 in 5 are at risk of hunger every day in a city as wealthy as Bristol. And the wealth has raced off over the hill and left people behind. That causes a problem. Not only is it morally problematic, but it's also economically and politically problematic. Economically, because we live in one of the most socially immobile countries in the OECD. That means that people born into poverty don't get the opportunity to ascend, irrespective of their talents and their abilities. Some do, but as a rule, they don't. By the way, the flip side of that also means that untalented people who are born into wealth and privilege don't come down and retain their positions of leadership, which is another political problem. But if that talent does not get the opportunity to ascend, then the businesses don't get access to it. So we leave millions of pounds worth of talent undeveloped on the shelf every year because that talent was born into poverty. That's massive. The political, social consequences of that we've seen in some of the reactionary politics. My colours are nailed to the mast. I'm not a Donald Trump fan, but you can see, and even in some of the Brexit arguments, these are people who, being seduced by a fraud who's playing on their concerns that they've been left behind by the global economy, and they have been left behind by the global economy. That's the truth of it, right? And it makes society vulnerable to that implosion, to blaming migrants and all the other problems. But I actually think something that you just said sparked me off as well. Leave no one behind does not just apply to the big bad global economy that some of the activists kind of community point to. It also applies to social justice movements that are in danger sometimes, particularly environmental movement, of leaving working class people out. And these movements become dominated by the wealthy middle class, who don't always understand, don't always have the ability to connect with, and sometimes can be quite intolerant to the experiences of working class people, or people on the underclass of society, who may not be thinking about existential threats in 30 years' time, but may just be thinking about how they're going to get through the next day or even the next week. So it's really important that social justice movements don't think they get a pass on being inclusive because they are fighting for the right thing. They in of themselves can recreate the very same power hierarchies that we criticize in our wider political economy, but have also, I would say, caused such major problems in our wider political economy.
Yes, definitely, I agree with you. In the recent, I read a recent interview with Jenna Arundel-Curti, and you described yourself that you're Black, you're mixed race, and that you come from a poor background. In addition to this, you were raised by a single mother. So you clearly come from a disadvantaged background. My question is, how is Bristol, with you as a mayor, promoting inclusion and diversity?
Well, there is, so when I talk about inclusion and diversity, by the way, it's probably worth setting out. I'm looking at all those drivers that have led to an unfair playing field, that have robbed people of opportunity simply because of what they are. They'll be around ethnicity and race. They'll be around gender, disability, class, migration status, sexuality, the whole gamut, right? And what I'm always at pains to point out is they're all true. And talking about one does not mean we're not talking about the other. Talking about race does not mean we're not talking about gender. We just happen to be talking about race. When we talk about disability, it doesn't mean we're not talking about race or gender. We're not trying to undermine those stories. We're just talking about disability at that particular point in time. So we've got to find a way of talking about inclusion and diversity that just respects all those stories. But I suppose Bristol elected me. I am, as you said, I grew up on benefits myself for quite a few years till my mum started working again. She was a white woman, had me in 1972. It was, they come with a lot of stigma, being unmarried with no money and a brown baby in Britain in 1972. And many of our experiences that followed, come in line with that. Life was tough growing up. I could be chased down the street. And I said, even in my lifetime, chased down the street by people calling me this, that, and the other, telling me to go back to my own country. And, but at the same time, I experienced all that. At the same time, my primary caring family were white. And this is a city that eventually elected me mayor. So there's all sorts of contradictions in Bristol, as they are in any individual too. We're all full of contradictions, aren't we? But what we're doing, one is we've made it clear, we've made it a statement. We're unashamed in talking about inclusion, but again, because it's the right thing to do, but also because it makes business, political and economic sense to be inclusive and to be making use of all the talents at your disposal. That's important for us. We also want to understand who we are. So diverse is what we are. There is no uniform Britishness. Men do not experience in Britain in the same way as women, right? On a very, very basic level, wealthy people do not experience Britain in the same way as lower income people. So we are diverse by nature. But if we ramp this up, Bristol is a city of 180 countries of origin, 92 languages, 45 religions. Bristol is diverse. And I would say actually most cities actually understand themselves as global. Cities only exist because things move and cross over. So cities sit at the intersection of movements, don't they, right? People cross over, trade crosses over, cultures cross over, transport lines cross over, and there you get cities growing up. So by their very nature, cities are diverse, they're the results of movement, their identities are multidimensional. And that's the conversation we've been having with Bristol, one that Bristol's embracing. But we're doing some very practical things as well. We have an equality charter that the city signed up to, which is about inclusion, diversity, and obviously, as it says on the tin, equality. We have a program called Stepping Up, which supports people who've been stuck in mid-management level to get into more senior positions. We're doing a lot of work with the mayors on migration. And in fact, in this city, 36,000 Bristol citizens have applied for the EU settlement scheme in Bristol. And we were held up as a city that was doing really good work on supporting people to navigate the challenges of Brexit and to safeguard their rights. So we're a city of sanctuary as well, which is all about, in the first instance, it's about migration. But beyond that, it's about being a place of sanctuary for anyone looking for a home, looking for safety. Now, these things are easy to say, they're much harder to do, but we're trying to do them.
Yes, I definitely can agree that there are a lot of, I personally have a lot of friends living in the UK, and two of them live in Bristol, and they're from Poland. And I definitely describe the city as very open-minded and multiculti. So it's just which is a good thing. Definitely, it's a good thing. In the
life
same
would be
interview,
boring if life would be boring and empty if it was just one-dimensional. You know, it's got to be dynamic. Got change. Change makes us what we are, isn't it?
Exactly, I agree. I totally agree with you. In the same interview, you also mentioned that there is a increased need for mentorship of youth that come from a disadvantaged background. Why do you think it plays such an important role?
Because I think people make decisions with the tools we put in their hands. You know, and if we want our young people to be able to make decisions, we've got to put good tools in their hands. We have to do that on purpose. I have a little bit of agitation in me when I hear people say I'm self-made. No one's self-made, right? Well, there may be a few individuals that have just come out of nowhere, but most people are the product of, you know, they have a character, but it interacts with the world around them, and then they become. That's why people spend lots of money to send their children to posh schools, because they want to put tools in their hands in which to build this flamboyant life. So we need to be proactive in mentoring, connecting with young people, and putting tools in their hands, helping them to think about the challenges they face and helping them to understand the challenges they face and the world they're moving into. Now, I give a talk. I talk to young people quite a bit, and you know, I give them. I look back on my life, you know, and I share. You know, I say, look, have ambition, but if you're going to have ambition, get ready to fail, because by its very nature, ambition and aspiration takes you places that are beyond yourself, and sometimes you're going to fail. Just get ready for it, you know. And then the question is, how do you turn that failure into a life lesson? There's a mixed martial artist called Conor McGregor. It's got a flamboyant character, but there was a phrase he used I thought was absolutely fantastic. He said, "I win or I learn." All right, not I win or I lose. I win or I learn. I love what that was one of the best things you know, I'd heard. So, you know, I talk to young people about making good friends. You know, at 15, it feels like the people you know are everyone, even at 21. But people make friends into their 30s and even their 40s. You know, but you become your friends, and so choosing your friends is one of the biggest decisions you have to make in life. Now, not really. People didn't really tell me these things when I was a kid. They didn't tell me to relax. They didn't tell me how I can have a sense of peace in myself. I was just cast adrift on the world, and so, you know, I made some progress, but there's a whole trail of mistakes and unnecessary, unforced errors on my route to becoming mayor. You know, and I'm still making errors today. So yeah, we've got to support young people just to give them the benefits of older people's wisdom and insights.
So you didn't have yourself a mentor, I said, when you were younger?
No, I had a couple of I had a collection of experiences that really helped me. I started boxing, which gave me a lot of self-esteem and helped me overcome my feelings of vulnerability. I had a stable home. My mum and my grandparents and aunt and cousins loved me. And so I knew I felt secure, and I had the opportunities to get outside the city boundaries and go and climb a mountain or two. So I knew the world was much bigger than the area in which I grew up. Those things, and I had a teacher as well, one or two teachers who believed in me. Those things come together to kind of spur me on and give me a thirst for not just settling for what the world that was in front of me, and that helped. But there was no one who kind of put their arm around me and said, okay, this is what I see in you, and this is where I think you can go, and if you want to go there in 10, 15 years time, this is where you need to be in a year's time. I think some of that advice needs to become that practical.
Yes, I definitely resonate with you. I also had a teacher who helped me a lot when I was struggling, and without her, it would be much, much harder for me to go through some moments of my life.
Yeah.
So going to the end of our conversation, that's unfortunately the last question because we're running out of time. But I'm very curious, how is Bristol increasing the inclusion of youth in civic participation practices?
So we have youth mayors who are doing an incredible job, by the way, 2 youth mayors. And it's something actually to let you know about. They're looking at organizing an event for young politicians, youth politicians and students, possibly for January or February after Brexit. The message being that cities and young people in the UK want to stay connected with cities and young people across Europe. So we're really encouraging them to do that. We have a youth council within the city. And beyond that, we have a few fantastic organizations in Bristol that are really committed to youth empowerment and youth voice. One is Babasa, which is founded and run by a friend of mine called Poku Ose. They have hundreds of kids come through. They set them up with mentors in business and support them to move on in life, again, phenomenal work. And the other is Off the Record, which is a mental health, young people's mental health charity. But again, a friend of mine was the former chief exec, very much an empowerment model. So let's give you more power, influence over your environment. That's one of the pathways to increase resilience and improve health. So political power being the pathway. And then I do a lot of engagements myself with young people. I speak to schools probably every other week, so secondary school or primary school. I get out, I do youth groups whenever they want, and I just try to be accessible to demystify power. When I was growing up, I didn't know any politicians. But when young people meet me, hopefully they can meet politicians, and not just a politician, but a politician who comes from a background like them. I lived in a refuge with my mum, where we had to go to for safety when I was a child. I did live in a house in which sometimes we couldn't put any money in the electric meter because we didn't have any money left, so we had no electricity. We did struggle for food sometimes. So, and I'm not saying it's easy, and if you work hard enough, you get it. That's a nonsense statement. The world can be very unfair and very unjust, but you can make it more likely that you'll be able to get on than less likely. And we try and do that here.
You're definitely the great example that someone who comes from a very disadvantaged background is still able to achieve something, even if those obstacles are in front of you. You still can be someone, whoever you want to be. So thank you for the conversation. Time passed definitely too quickly. Thank you for your thoughts and for sharing your opinions. I wish you all the best and good luck with your further activities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.